Newly appointed Bulls director of rugby Jake White has a clear vision of turning the franchise into the dominant force in Southern Hemisphere rugby. With the backing of wealthy owners at Loftus Versfeld, White has the means to see his project through. All he needs now is for the coronavirus pandemic to pass so that he can start work in earnest. While he waits to get his hands on the team, he joins the Maverick Sports Podcast today to talk about his journey, the great moments of joy and despair, and to reminisce about some key incidents in a career that has spanned Himalayan highs and deep lows. White has his critics, but ultimately he has been successful with every team he has coached in a career that has spanned 35 years.
Less than 1 minute to go. South Africa destined to become the world champions. 12 years after they won it the first time, on the brink of history. They're about to become world champions. And just as England did 4 years ago, right on the stroke of full time, they kick it into touch. And John Smith and his team are the winners here in the Stade de France. South Africa are the champions. They've created their own bit of history, and the whole of South Africa will be delighted.
Jake White, do you still get goosebumps when you hear that?
Yeah, I still do, Craig. I mean, it's interesting. I don't think it'll ever go away. When you reminisce, I can almost, as I hear that voice, and I hear that commentary, I can actually picture in my mind what happened. Skulkberger running off the back of a scrum and Osterrand carrying it. I think the story goes that while they were doing that sort of last couple of minutes, that guys in the team like Skulk and that were saying to the English, 4 more years. In other words, it's gone. They're not going to win this one. So, yeah, obviously a lot of nice stories, a lot of nice memories. And, as I said, probably never, ever get tired of sort of remembering and reminiscing about that fantastic day.
The World Cup 2007 for most South Africans, anytime South Africa wins a World Cup, it's a massive thing. Does that still remain the pinnacle of your career? I know it seems like an obvious question, but sometimes people find the little things in their coaching career, maybe turning a player around or something equally as gratifying. Does that still rank as the biggest moment of your career?
Yeah, it probably doesn't, Craig. I think the biggest moment in my career probably is when I've got picked to coach South Africa. Let's not forget that, having never played provincial rugby, hadn't, never been an international player, never been a Springbok, just came through the schoolmaster ranks. It was always, I suppose, a selected group of people that would have coached the national team in South Africa. So, I think the day that I became the Springbok coach was, for me, the biggest highlight, because, obviously all these were spin-offs from that day. I've had some wonderful experiences. I've been very fortunate, winning a junior World Cup, winning a senior World Cup. We beat the British and Irish Lions, which was also up there, and we won Tri-Nations, which again, first time in the first year we were together. So, yeah, but I think all in all, just the fact that as an English-speaking guy, having come from being a schoolmaster and then coaching the Springboks, which is our national sport, in a time like 2004, which is very close to when professionalism started, is obviously, I think, probably the highlight of all the things I've achieved.
Yeah, and it was an amazing run those 4 years, and they weren't without their problems. We can get into that a little bit later, but let's just go back. Jake White, the coach. You were a schoolboy, high school at Jeppe Boys High. You grew up at an Afrikaans primary school. Give the listeners a bit of your background and your journey into rugby.
Well, my very first rugby sort of experience was I was at Dale College as a junior, and I remember going down as a sort of under 6 boy with my boots down to the field. I just loved playing rugby. I was always in the boarding school. I think people that grew up in boarding schools would understand that one of the sort of things you get when you're in the A rugby side is you get a little bit of favor. And I think I was lucky enough that I spent most of my age group years in the A side. At prep school, I captained the first 15 as a prep school boy, and again, probably got some massive privileges from the masters that were my coaches. And then, as you say, left and went to Jeppe and started playing rugby at Jeppe. And I was lucky enough again, to have been in the A side, stayed in the boarding house. But always I had masters that were very influential in my career. I had a guy called Bernard Fridman who was a master, an old boy of Jeppe, who coached me basically under 13A, 14A, 15A. I actually went to go and play hockey in my under 15 year. I thought I'd go and play hockey. I thought that I wasn't growing, and I was playing hooker, and I thought, I'd probably go and one of my best friends was playing hockey, and he was a talented hockey player. I said, come and try hockey. And in fact, Bernard Fridman came and fetched me and said, listen, you can't stay and play hockey. Come down to the rugby fields. And then I went and coached at Parktown Boys High when I left. I was a student. I used to run to Parktown Boys High from JC when I was studying to be a teacher. And I used to run there and coach, literally 4 times a week and referee games on Saturdays. And I just enjoyed it. I just enjoyed the sort of impact and the sort of, as you say, the way you could influence people's lives. And then I started teaching and, lucky enough, got involved in coaching, started coaching the juniors at JP. And then I went up to coach the first 15 for a couple of years, got to coach Craven Week for a few years. At the same time, I was coaching club sides like Rao University and Wits University for a while. And then moved up through the ranks, moved up to under 21s provincially. And then I suppose the biggest break I got was when Nick Mallett phoned me and asked me to do the video analyst in the time that he became the coach, which you can imagine. First 17 test matches, we won 16, or first 16, we won 15. So, almost I couldn't believe that I could literally go from being a schoolmaster into an environment like that and then work with guys like Henry Honeyball, Oosterrand, Joost van der Westhuizen, Mark Andrews, great players who played in that time, Gary Toshman, Andre Venter. I sort of used to pinch myself and say to Nick, I can't believe how lucky I am. I've always had a love for rugby, Craig, and I think that one of the things that I've been very fortunate enough is that it's opened incredible doors for me and created massive opportunities for me.
Absolutely. And just going into that video analysis in 1997, 98, thereabouts, it must have been vastly different to what it is now. I mean, the kind of analysis you get now, how much has that side of the game changed in the last 23, 24 years?
Yeah, geez, immensely. I remember, one of the interesting stories, when I used to go as an analyst to the Springboks, we used to take flight cases of about 7, 8, 9 flight cases with video recorders and computers, literally the whole computer, the hard drive and
The old desktop.
everything. You had to plug it in and find power and then make sure that it could work and then make sure that it didn't crash. And if it did crash, a couple of times it did crash, it was actually developed by an Israeli guy who was in the army in Israel. And it was, I had to phone, and then they told me he's out at war. So I had to wait till he had to come back to give me. So it was a very stressful time. And, those days of cutting tapes and carrying all the videotapes, it was a question of, if we were playing against Ireland or against England, I'd have to find all their Six Nations games, put them on a tape. God forbid I lose the tape or the suitcase goes missing. Literally all your analysis goes out the window. So I used to cut all the games and put it onto one tape and then put that tape in my hand luggage so that I knew that at least I had the tape. If everything else failed, at least I had a tape that I could know the team. Obviously, cut it for Nick and let Nick do the analysis. So, and if you look now, it's analysis is incredible. You got emails and WhatsApp, and you've got internet, and you've got you can basically download a game quickly. Those days, we'd have to literally take the whole night on Saturday night to make sure that the videos were ready for Sunday's feedback sessions.
And it's been a big aspect in the game and how it's changed. Going back to those school days, you said you kind of had to be persuaded to come out for playing hockey and go to rugby, but you sort of had that influence on some people when you became coach. I remember you told the story, James Dalton, who became a Springbok hooker. He didn't want to play in the front row, and you told him something like, make yourself comfortable. He was moaning about how uncomfortable he was.
Yes, I'll never forget. He was an incredible schoolboy player, and he played flank, and he wanted to play flank, and through the age groups played flank, and we got it to the standard 9 year, which is obviously his second last year at high school. And I said to him, look, you're going to play in the front row. And he said, look, I don't really want to play there. I said, well, you better put some tape around your ears and you better come back and see whether we can fit you in. And while he was putting the tape around his ears, I said to the guys in the front row, listen, we need to make sure that we put pressure there. I want to see whether he can actually, whether he can cope. Knowing full well he could, but I wanted to see. And basically the first scrum, because he had never been in that position, he was basically had his bum in the air and he had his neck down and he wasn't quite sure how it all fitted. And he said, Coach, I'm uncomfortable. And I said, well, make yourself comfortable. And he just moved that whole scrum by himself until eventually it was exactly how he wanted to have it. And from that day, the rest is history. He's gone from there to play SA schools. He got played for South Africa, and obviously I think he's played about 50 test matches. So yeah, it was a great thing for him to take that opportunity and change.
And that's a key to good coaches, isn't it? Or spotting talent, but maybe sometimes changing a position, like moving a guy somewhere where he's not comfortable. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but there were probably a few guys in your more senior coaching career. You played Juan Smith at lock, for instance, in the 2002 under-20s, and he became a great flank. That's not a massive switch, but is the key to coaching trying to be flexible in terms of seeing talent and somehow trying to make it fit, or is it the other way around?
No, I think it's definitely like that. I think as a schoolmaster too, Craig, I think what happens is, I mean, you have an age group coming through the school, and if there's only one lock, there's only one lock, and you've got to try and find how you're going to, develop someone else who might be tall and lanky, who, might have been a late developer as a, one of the stories you would know is that Sean Robenheimer played fullback, came in and played number 8. 3 years he played Transvaal Schools as a number 8.
Yeah.
Look at a guy like Francois Steyn, who played 12 in the World Cup final. He was a 10 and he played wing at sometimes. And so I think that one of the things that you've got to do as a coach is find ways in which you can get the best team together. I think it's not always. I think often what happens is coaches think there's only one position for a player, but you look at a guy like Geordie Barrett now. You look at a guy like Bowden Barrett. Those guys can play fullback, and you look at a guy like Dan Carter who played 10 and 12. Johnny Wilkinson played 10 and 12. At this point in time, you got Farrell playing 10, 12, plays 10 for Saracens, 12 for England. So, I think that you're right. I think that one of the secrets of being a good coach is understanding about how you want to put the team together. And I think more and more now, the versatility of players is so important because, necessarily does certain things. I often spoke about provincial coaches when I was coaching Craven Week. I said, I wonder what the backline would look like if we picked all the fly halves in all the boys' schools to play in the backline.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, wouldn't it?
Literally, most schools that have got limited numbers usually pick their best player at 10.
Yeah.
I wondered what it would look like if we picked a sort of an area team from one area with smaller schools, and we put all the fly halves in the backline. And everyone understood their best ball players were all playing. So one would go to 12, one would go to 13, one would go to fullback. And I wonder what that would look like. So I think it is definitely a skill, but it's also people are a bit scared of doing it, Craig, because there's so much, it costs, there's so much you can lose, and they're scared about losing. And so I think sometimes they get a bit, especially, at schoolboy level now, it's so competitive. Some guys are probably scared to try those sort of things. And, all I'll say is that it's now a career. Let's be fair. In the old days, you had a big inside center at school, at prep school. He ran through and scored all the tries. The team was unbeaten. But when that prep school boy gets to high school and stops growing, the chances are he should probably move to front row or hooker, and he ends up making it. We leave him at inside center for the next 5 years, and you never hear from him again. He basically finished high school, and he reminisces about how good he was as a junior.
Yeah. But that point you make on high school, like if you only got one good lock, you've got to make a plan. And that's part of the art of coaching and the beauty of schoolboy rugby. I mean, schoolboy rugby's become, it's certainly at the top sort of 10, 12 schools these days in South Africa. It's become so competitive, and there's so much recruitment. And I personally don't think that's great for the game because, you just have these top 10 schools buying the best players, and, and it's sort of undermining the whole process. Do you prefer the romance of sort of trying to make do with what you've got every year?
Well, I mean, I suppose it's a catch-22 because at the end of the day, if you work it out, there's no junior rugby anymore. I mean, you think about old days, you used to have, Transvaal B, or you used to have, the Roy Bokke, or you had, Western Province League, and you had under 23s and you had under 21s. Now there's just basically schools and under 20s. So, I think what's happened is that the school first 15 positions have become so much more important. You look at coaches going now. Peter Rousseau was a Super Rugby coach. He's now coaching Paul Jim. So
yeah,
it's interesting. I mean, but I do think also let's not underestimate the fact that that is what we're going to. The school platform now is basically the platform that used to be the sort of junior platform in the province.
They're the academies, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think I sort of thought about it when you were talking now. But schools has always been important. You look at some of the best coaches in the world; they were schoolmasters.
Yeah.
You look at a guy like Wayne Henry was a headmaster. You look at Clive Woodward was a master. Eddie Jones was a master. Donnie Craven was a master. Nick Mallet was a schoolmaster. So when you look at it, there's lots and lots of coaches who've come out of the teaching and used, obviously schools as their sort of building ground for their development, and obviously for learning on how to coach as a coach.
But coaching is teaching, isn't it? I mean, that's
exactly that. I mean, teaching is. I mean, rugby is a subject. I mean, the reality is about as a teacher, you've got to teach your subject. And if you want to be a master of your subject, you've got to be a master in rugby as well, because the art of actually getting the message across is the art of teaching. And one of the things I've been lucky enough as well, Craig, having taught and I've obviously picked up, lesson plans and what the sort of key fundamentals are of getting your message across. But I've also been fortunate that I coached in Japan and France, and in those two countries, I don't speak the language. I mean, obviously, I can speak French now, but at the first, when I got there, I couldn't understand it. And in Japan, I couldn't speak Japanese. But so the way that you coach is through a translator.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's very important that the way you package the message and the way you sell the message and the way that you prepare the message is the art of coaching and the art of teaching. And
Yeah.
even there, you learn how important, as you say, that it's a subject and how you get your subject across.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And on that, you said you got to pick the best team. And I suppose that's as opposed to the best individuals. And that's what a lot of people from the outside looking in, especially with the Springboks in this country, because they're the most high profile team. And when you were coaching, people are going, why are you not picking Bismarck Duplessis at hooker? Why that guy, John Smith? He's out of, he's not in the best hooker in the country or whatever. But as the coach on the inside, you are looking at it as the best team versus maybe the form guy in this position. How difficult is that balancing act when it comes with all the other pressures?
Well, I mean, that is, again, part of what you learn as a coach. And I think you learn that over time and you learn that over experience as well. And I think one thing I have learned as I've looked back, I mean, I at the time probably didn't understand it, but I know now that people are passionate and people have a view, and the fact that they debate that over the bras in South Africa, or they say, why does he pick him? Why does he pick him? It's only because they just love rugby and they want to, I suppose, have a view about certain things. And you'll never make everyone happy. I mean, that's the reality. The fact that they debate it all the time, not even the people standing around that bra all agree that necessarily the team that the one guy would pick would be the same team he would pick. When you use that example, I think that also for me, Craig, that relationships you have with your players, people don't understand that. So when you're backing a guy like John Smith, you're backing a guy like Osterrand, or you're backing a guy like Percy Montgomery, I think that in a lot of times those three guys took a lot of flack while I was coaching. And, two of them already been inducted into the Rugby Hall of Fame. I've got no doubt that, a guy like Monty would be inducted in the Hall of Fame soon, or will inevitably get inducted in the Hall of Fame. Now, that's ironic for three guys to be inducted in the Hall of Fame when they were considered at the time of not being good enough. Os was supposedly too old. Monty was blonde hair and silver boots and shouldn't have been there. He holds every kicking record that has ever existed.
Yeah.
Osterrand at 36 played in the World Cup final, played 2 World Cup finals and played 80 minutes in both of them, which is an incredible thing. And John Smith, obviously, his record speaks for himself. So, yeah, Craig, I'm only using those examples because you will get people will criticize and people will, but it's only because they're passionate and because of the fact we have so many good players. I mean, that's why they can debate.
Yeah.
When you have a country where you don't have lots of rugby players, you probably don't have the same emotion and passion about selection.
I know we're jumping around in the timeline a bit, but going back to the sort of early 90s when you were Craven Week coach, and then you got a little, I think you Transvaal under 21 as it was then, you got a little coaching gig there. And I think one of the Transvaal suits phoned Jeppy Boy's Eye, where you were a teacher, and asked the headmaster David Quayle if you were the right guy to coach their rugby, and his answer was quite funny. Do you remember what he said to the guy?
No, I actually don't, Craig. I mean, you can remind me that.
It's teaching you're wanting for, I'm not so sure, but if it's rugby, he'll give you 100%.
I was lucky enough that the headmaster who was at GP at the time was a headmaster when I was a schoolboy as well. So he knew me not only as a master, he knew me as a schoolboy as well. And which I suppose comes with its problems as well, because he was the same master that used to cane me or whack me when I was naughty, and then I was all of a sudden a staff member with him. But I remember one day, Craig, another story is I was coaching, and I was obviously coaching, and I was doing phys ed. I was doing the physical education, and I did a couple of lessons and you would know, I think you were in probably one of those classes. I used to have a classroom very close to the swimming pool, and I used to teach a bit of biology and science. And I remember the headmaster once said to me, listen, I've decided that from next year you can take all the physical education in the school and you don't have to do any more of the subjects. And I asked him, I said, Mr. Quayle, is that because you think I'm a very good phys ed teacher, or you don't rate me as an academic teacher? And he said, you decide.
Well, I suppose that answers your question, but it set you on the right path. And, we're skipping ahead, but you become junior box coach. Well, first of all, you assistant coach to the junior box in 1999 with Eric Sauls as the head coach. That team had John Smith, among others, in it. You guys win the... wasn't called the World Championship then, because it was the sort of initial tournament was called the Sanzar it was basically the Sanzar teams and a couple of others from the Northern Hemisphere. But you win that final and become unofficial world champions. A few years later, you go on and you're now officially appointed in 2002 as the junior Bok, as it is now, the SA Under 21 coach. And that was after 2 pretty difficult years with the SA Under 21s, which you weren't involved in, as far as I'm aware. The 2 previous years in 2000 and 2001. What was the mandate given to you in 2002 by, was it Rian Uber also was CEO at that point?
Well, the mandate was, I'll give you whatever you want, Jake, but you got to win, And so first time we had camps, and the first time we sort of had selection criteria, and we went around the country and we did testing protocols. I went with Doc Derek Kutsia, and we tested every single under 21, or at that stage under 21 player, potential under 21 players. We put them on databases. We had follow-up meetings with them. We picked about, I suppose, 4 or 5 teams. We had trials. We cut that team down to about 2 or 3 teams, had another sort of round of trials, and eventually picked the final squad. We had played a couple of friendly games against the Army, I think, and played a couple of friendly games against some club teams up in the Mpumalanga area. So, and then we obviously got to pick a really strong side. I mean, you consider that side was, a lot of those guys ended up playing in the 2007 World Cup, and that's, I suppose, also what was also very nice is that having coached 99, we had John Smith, we had Butch James, we had Jaco van der Westhuizen, we had Sean Sauby. We had a couple of those guys that were really talented. And then in the 2002 side, we had Guthrie Steenkamp, and we had Gary Botha and John Smith, Pedri Vandenberg and Jacques Cronje, John de Villiers, Skulk Berger, Farid Dupree, Ricky January, Ashwin Willemse. So, when you put those two teams together, I'm probably very fortunate in that when I did start coaching the box in 2004, I generally spend lots and lots of time with that group of players anyway. I'd either coach them as juniors in some form or the other. And then I went to the SA under 23 side, and I went with the SA side to Europe and Morocco, and we had Bakis Botha there, and we had Khafi du Toit, and Don Himan and Van Rotenbach, and that sort of group of players. So, across the spectrum, Craig, I basically knew all the under 21s from 1999, sort of under 23s and those sort of age groups in between that, and then obviously the juniors that were coming through in 2002. So, yeah, it was very simple. I mean, when I say very simple, Rian just said, I'll give you what you want, you've got to win. And remember, we hosted it, was at Ellis Park.
Yeah.
And we ended up beating, I remember we had a fantastic, in both those World Cups, we beat New Zealand, Australia, France, England, Wales in both those competitions. Even though the one in Argentina wasn't a World Cup, we had to beat Wales, England, France, Australia, and New Zealand to win it. So I just knew that if we had dominated our own age groups, man to man, there was no reason why when we got together in 2004, if we kept the team together, that they wouldn't be able to dominate their own counterparts at the same age, obviously in 2007.
Yeah, and that 2002 World Cup on home soil, 2 games stand out for me. Obviously, you were the semi-final on a cold Tuesday night at the Rand Afrikaans University or University of Johannesburg Stadium against the All Blacks, or the junior All Blacks, that had a team that was full of future superstars, including Dan Carter, I think, among others. That was a close win, wasn't it? But that must have been, at that point in your career, the most satisfying win of your career.
Yeah, of course. That can you imagine? I think also beating the All Blacks in Argentina in the final as well, when you're en route to the winning kick. If you look at that team, you had Paul Tito and Chris Jack and Doug Howlett and Ben Blair, and they had an incredible team that day as well. So, yeah, it's always nice to beat those New Zealand sides because they're so well prepared and they're such good sides, and you get such a massive boost from beating them. So, going from that game into playing Australia, who I must say also had an incredible team in 2002. They had Mark Gerard and they had Mark Chisholm and they
did.
Shepherdson, and they really are that. In fact, they had Matt Guitar on the bench as a reserve halfback because they played Henjack. So they Henjack, yeah. And it was, as I said, it was an incredible Ben. They had a really, really good side. Brock James played 10 for them, and Brock James, what he's done well for Claremont, etc. So to get a win in front of the Ellis Park crowd there, and then having, like you said, in 2 consecutive games, Tuesday and Saturday, hadn't beat New Zealand and Australia, was an incredible feat.
Yeah, it was. And a little known fact, some people might remember it, Clyde Rathbone was your captain of that side. He ended up playing for the Wallabies after that.
Yeah, and for the Brumbies. It was, again, when I got the Brumbies, I brought him back and got him to play again. He had come back from a bit of a knee injury, and we tried to rehab him like we did with Oosterrand in his time. And yeah, so he was the captain. I tried really hard to try and keep him in South Africa, but at that time he was actually considering immigrating with his family to Australia, which subsequently has happened, and he's gone on to play for Australia, gone on to obviously play for the Brumbies many, many times. Still lives in Canberra, so yeah.
Let's fast forward to 2004. You weren't on the initial shortlist to be the Springbok coach, and then suddenly you were called. You were at a conference, I think, in New Zealand doing some presentation where you got a phone call to sort of make yourself available. Is that right?
Yeah, so I was actually in New Zealand doing a presentation there for, I think, for as part of SA Rugby. I think they asked me to go and do some presentation there, and I think there was a sort of gathering of all the coaches around the world, and they were discussing maybe it was law changes or some potential law changes. And then I was on my way to actually go and visit Clyde Rathbone in Canberra and spend some time with the Brumbies. I'd arranged to sort of go and do some personal development there. And while I was overseas, Arthur Peterson, phoned me and said, "Listen, would you consider putting your name in the hat for the national job?" And I said, "Look, Arthur, of course I would, but I mean, it's not just, is it just sort of a token of me doing it, or is there a genuine chance?" And he said, "Yeah. What we're going to do is we're going to, make a short list, and everyone will do a presentation, and we'd like you to, obviously prepare something." So I got back, and put something together, and then went through a whole sort of presentation with a committee, and had to, present on how I saw the game was going to get played and which sort of players I was going to pick, and give them basically a 4-year vision in terms of, what the selection would look like going forward, who would be in my plans, what sort of staff I'd want to pick, etc., etc. And I was lucky enough to get appointed.
That was probably the best decision those guys made at that time, because there was a lot of problems in SA Rugby. They didn't go away, and you bumped heads. But your first 4 tests in charge, you got 4 wins, beat Ireland at home, and then thrashed Wales 53-18. Then there was that interesting game against the Pacific Islanders I think it was Gosford, somewhere in Australia.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
then the heartbreak, your first match against the All Blacks, and you're a couple of minutes from victory, and I think Doug Howlett scores in the corner with a couple of minutes to go.
yes.
That must have been pretty gutting, because it was a very good performance, as I remember. It was probably, you could honestly say the Boks were unlucky to lose that day.
Well, I think we scored 3 tries. They scored 1. So again, it puts things in
Mm,
perspective. We thought we were going to win that game, and as you say, literally on the last play of the game, Doug Allard scored in the corner, and they converted.
yeah,
So that game, I think a lot of supporters then, obviously were very excited and happy about the comeback of the way the Boks. I think a lot of people didn't give us a chance at all when we got to New Zealand. I remember being in the hotel there, and I got a letter under my door from Andre Joubert
mm,
in the Rolls Royce of fullbacks from the Sharks. I don't know why he was there, but he was obviously there on business or something, and he put a letter under my door. He left early the next morning to fly back, and he just said, "Look, just to tell you, I'm very, very proud to be a Springbok, and I'm just very, very proud to see the way the boys played last night." And
yeah.
I think I've still got that letter. So, it was really, I suppose, getting it from a guy like him, I think it obviously made me realize that there was something special was happening, and that, again, South Africa and especially the ex-players were very happy with what they saw.
Yeah, and that was a very competitive Tri Nations that year, because you then just lost again narrowly to Australia away, but you came home and beat New Zealand 40-26 at Ellis Park. Maurice Joubert famously scores a hat trick. Um, that that was a game that I think gave everyone belief that, geez, the Springbok team is really the real deal now. Did you feel the same after that Ellis Park performance?
Yeah, well, just even before that, Craig, because what actually happened, I don't think, obviously you play different weekends, and the
Mm,
weekend before, 2 weekends before that game, Australia played New Zealand. And I think, if I remember correctly, Australia beat New Zealand in Australia.
right.
And what that meant is that all we had to do was win. We had to just win the 2 home games to win the championship. So we were fully aware.
Yeah.
And I remember getting a text message from John Smith and a couple of the players that when they had watched that on a Saturday morning, I think I was watching my son play rugby somewhere at school, and I got this message on my phone saying, "Can you believe it? We're alive." And I just sensed there that when the way the players were sending messages to each other and sending messages to the staff, it was almost like all we need now is to win at home, and we've won the Tri Nations. So yeah, we won that first one, and obviously then we played Australia in Durban in a obviously a massive game. And let's not forget they dominated for a long time as well. That team that they had, Larkham and Gregan, and so to get a win there and then win the Tri Nations in the first year was fantastic. Even though we only won 2 out of 4 games, it was probably still a massive boost for us as a group.
Yeah, and the trajectory continued to go really well. I actually think maybe the 2005 Tri Nations, you probably played some of your more dominant rugby, but you didn't win it that year, thanks to the All Blacks doing their thing again. A late try from Kevin Mealame in Dunedin. But prior to that, you had beaten the All Blacks at Newlands, and I say this is a significant win because the All Blacks had just thrashed the British and Irish Lions in a 3-test series. Dan Carter had given one of the most amazing performances, I think, in the second test. And the All Blacks arrived in Cape Town, and everyone said, well, this All Black side is just absolutely hammered the British and Irish Lions. There's no way the Springboks can beat this team. They're just an exceptional All Black team, and you guys beat them at Newlands, and that again showed that sort of how far you had come in 2 years.
Yeah, that was a special day. I mean, that again, I think I got a stat there. I remember Mornay du Plessis handed the jerseys out for us, and I think someone said we hadn't beaten All Blacks in Newlands for a long, long time. So that was also a significant win. Yeah, and I do think that 2005 we played well enough to win the Tri Nations, and I'll never forget when you say me alarm we try. It was actually I remember Johan Smith was really upset because he knew they were going to throw to the back of the line out. And he actually wanted to contest, and he got halfway up. And Joe Fanikak, who was going to pick him up, actually was panicking about them actually coming around the back of the line out. And I think he sort of half lifted, half sort of tried to get off the back of the line out and put pressure on the back. And we sort of just missed that line out, I think. And John Smith felt that if he had been picked up, he would have stolen that line out, and they actually wouldn't have given them the platform to actually maul and go over for the try. So what we got out of that, Craig, is I remember talking to the players about that and just how small the margins are in terms of winning and losing.
Yeah.
It was a case of we just did what we had to do there, and Joe had stuck to the back of the lineup. But it's easier said than done, because if they'd gone around the back and he had lifted and they'd come and done an appeal and they ended up scoring, we would have said, So the message there was just how close it was, and that's why it would have been fantastic to do the double and win it back to back. But it wasn't meant to be, but I can say that it was. I think you're right. I mean, I think that even the All Blacks felt that we were then a genuine threat in world rugby.
Yeah, and I mean that little incident, like you say, it highlights. It sort of highlights the brutal nature of professional sport and of coaching at the highest level. I mean, it's about, I suppose, ultimately getting the players to trust the system. And if the system fails them, well, that's on your head. But it's about making sure that just do the thing that you're told to do, and if it doesn't work, well, that's on me. Is that one of the sometimes the frustrating things of coaching, because you go through the system, and not to pick on Joe in this particular incident,
No. That is one thing. I suppose the other way of looking at it is, yes, stick to the principles and stick to the job you're going to do, but also just learn from that. So that Joe, when you reflect on that, I would have also said the more they play together and the more that they're in that situation again, they won't make the same mistake. What tended to happen, I suppose, in many teams, and it happened in the past as well, is then Joe would have got dropped and there would be another combination, and then that one would make other mistakes. So that's why I go back to what you asked me just now, Craig. Sometimes by having a relationship, sometimes by sticking with certain groups of players. I remember during the time I was coaching, a lot of people thought it was almost impossible to get dropped by the Boks. But it was a massive bonus for me, because every time we assembled for a camp, I had the same group of players. So we could almost build on whatever we had got the year before. So, that example, we could always say when John Smith got another line out just outside the 22, and he felt like he could contest, or he had the reading right, or he thought that he could actually spoil that ball, he would have made sure that the guy who was with him the next time would have done what he would have wanted him to do, and he would have explained before the game. And that's because they would have been in that situation. So, yeah, I mean, it is. The margins are so small. And yes, you're right. I mean, had he get up and win, and then wins that line out, All Blacks lose another game, I mean, all of a sudden, the All Blacks are under pressure. So, unfortunately or fortunately, that is the nature we operate in. But, that's why we take the job.
I'm not going to go through every single game. Now, even to 2007, the World Cup, you get there, and there's a lot of angst getting there. 2006 is a difficult year. But you finally get the team you want, and you get yourself to the World Cup, and it goes pretty much according to plan. A few little scares along the way. Fiji in the quarterfinal for about 10-minute period there, and I think the Tonga game was also a little strange. But the All Blacks get knocked out in the quarterfinals. But one of the off the field things is during the World Cup, you are asked to reapply for your job, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, not really asked. I mean, basically what happened was there was an advert in the paper, on the Sunday paper, saying that you could apply for the job and the cutoff date would be on a certain day.
While you're at the World Cup.
And I found it odd. The cutoff date was actually in the middle of the World Cup. So they needed applications in before the World Cup, and before it was over. And I mean, two things you get out of that, Craig. One is that obviously you need to reapply for your job. And two is I'm not quite sure what you need to put in the CV. Win the World Cup, lost the World Cup, got knocked out in the, whatever that story was. And I just, I mean, a lot of said and read about it and written about it is, I just felt that obviously there was a sign there that, there's no, if they really wanted me, they would have asked me to stay, and sometimes you just know. Sometimes you just know that when there is that advert, basically what it is, the writing's on the wall. And it was a disappointing thing. I sort of got hold of SA Rugby and said, "What are you doing? And how are you doing? And why do you?" And they said, "Right, they extend it." And they extended it literally to the 19th of October, which was the day before the World Cup final. So,
Uh,
so it wasn't the way that I would have liked it to end it, but, I've obviously got older and wiser now, and obviously time has moved on, and, that was the way it was meant to be.
yeah, and look, you had the ultimate last say. You dumped the William Webb Ellis Cup on the SA Rugby desk and said, "There's my application if you want it." But obviously, yeah, as you say, the relationship had got to the point where it couldn't go on. You kind of didn't go immediately back into coaching. It took a little while. What did you do in those sort of few years after the World Cup?
Yeah, that's probably the one area, Craig, that I probably not regret. I think that I wished I could have done it again. I mean, I think staying out of the game, although I was in the game, I was on the World Rugby Committee and I was doing consulting and I was obviously spending my time, helping different teams, etc., etc. I sort of, if I look back again, I should have maybe gone straight into another job. I'd been offered a couple of jobs in the UK, and I don't know why. I just felt that, having gone through what I went through, I thought maybe I'd need some time off. I was also, I suppose, in deep down hoping that I would still get an extension and get back into the box setup. So sort of left myself open and available in case that would happen. I suppose in hindsight now, it was never going to happen. But yeah, so I kept myself busy. I stayed in rugby. As I said, I always would go and watch schoolboy games, or I'd spend lots of times at clubs, or at in doing some foreign work by doing some consultancy for clubs, etc., etc. And then out of the blue, the Brumbies got hold of me and asked me whether or not I'd consider going to live in Australia and try and coach the Brumbies team. And I just thought that would be the incredible fit for me. I enjoyed the way the Brumbies played. I've obviously probably, you get as a coach, you get packaged in a certain way, and maybe the way that I was coaching would probably be, completely different to the way the Brumbies have played over the years. And I thought, gee, it'd be a great way for me to develop as a coach and go and try and coach a team like the Brumbies, which I must say had a fantastic time there in the 2.5 years I was there.
Just rewinding a couple of, like 2008, 2009, the Springbok team you had built then goes on, and by 2009 they beat the Lions, they dominate the Tri-Nations as it was then. Did it hurt a little bit, sort of watching that team flowering in a way that without you there?
Yeah, Craig, I don't know if hurt's the right word. I think when you've coached the box, I mean, people, I don't know why, but they think that, obviously when there's bitterness I was very proud of the way they played. Remember, I'd still had relationships with lots of those players, and there was probably it wasn't hurt so much as in I just sometimes wish that I could have stayed with that team and seen, where the team could have got to. And when I saw them get to those sort of heights, obviously you feel like you've sort of missed it. You missed something that would have been special. But there wasn't hurt from the point of view that they won. I mean, I'm obviously very proud. It was fantastic. Not only did that group of players win the Tri-Nations and, as you say, the Lions series, a lot of those players played for about 12, 13 years, and a lot of them played 100 test matches, which is also,
Yeah.
for me, having started in, people are probably not aware, but the very first test against Ireland, we had 175 test caps in our team, of which Brayton Paulse had 60 and Osterrand had 40. Now, if you consider that from that team then went on, and literally every guy, barring a few, have played 100 test matches.
Yeah.
You look at John Smith, 100, Victor and Bakkies, Johan Smith, you go through it, Farid Dupree, Jean de Villiers. I mean, it's incredible what that group of players did in terms of the amount of games they played for South Africa. So, yeah, as I said, it's not hurt. It was obviously just a little bit of, would have been great. And I suppose at that time as well, I was young, Craig. People also don't understand. I was 40 when I coached South Africa, and I was 43 when we finished the World Cup. So imagine now you play, your highest level, and you finish off on the world stage in France, and you're the world champions, and you never coach international rugby again. It's almost, I suppose, you go through times where I was a little bit down on that, and obviously a little bit critical about things. But as I said, it wasn't meant to be, and I wouldn't change it for anything. I've been very blessed and very fortunate that what I have had and what I have experienced have been fantastic.
In 2013, Jake White's Brumbies scored an upset 26-23 Super Rugby semi-final win over the Bulls at Loftus Versfeld. And no one knew it then, But it was the last time that the Bulls were a respected force in the competition.
From Mornay Stain. I don't think the Bulls have got it though.
It was the Brumbies that delivered the death knell to a crumbling Bulls empire. And ironically, 7 years on, it will be White who has to pick up the pieces of the once great franchise in his new role as director of rugby.
Celebrating with White and Tamani. Well, Jake White has come here and planned, Joel.
Well, he's planned. We said he's a wise coach. We said he's street smart.
Well, they've stuck to their guns, the Brumbies. They've obviously been very well coached. They put the Bulls under pressure. So eventually, it is the Brumbies who will go to Hamilton with a brilliant win.
That was the last time the Bulls actually made the semi-finals in 2013. And now you're going to go over and help resurrect the Bulls. So you were kind of responsible for their last great moment. And now you're going to be picking them up.
All I was doing was making sure I had a job a couple of years later.
Yeah.
It is uncanny if you think about it. I mean, that's the first time they've ever lost a knockout game in Super Rugby as well, which, I mean, we can imagine. We had, if I remember correctly, we had to fly back from here to there, play another game in the quarterfinals, and we flew back here. Or we played in New Zealand, then we played. So we actually flew around the world and got back to Victoria. I don't think anyone thought we could win that game. And, I mean, literally took us to the last play of the game for us to win that game. And then nearly beat the Chiefs. We were leading far against the Chiefs. We got one or two tough calls against us, and the game changed. Then we ended up just losing that game. So, yeah, it was a great time with the Brumbies. I must say, I really enjoyed that time that I was with them, and beating the Bulls. I mean, as I said, it had never been done before. So there was also, not only did we beat the Bulls that year, we also beat the British and Irish Lions. It was only provincial side that could beat the British and Irish Lions.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
So we had some really special times with that Brumbies team. And then, one of the things that stands out for me is that Brumbies team we had, when I started, we had Ben Alexander and Stephen Moore, the two players that played for Australia. And when I left, by the time we'd finished, I mean, literally every other guy had played for the Wallabies. Jesse Mogg had come through, Henry Spate, Kurundrani and Christian Lealefana, Matt Tamua, Nick White. So, yeah, we were very, very fortunate that, those 2 years we fast-tracked a lot of guys who ended up playing for Australia.
Did you ever seriously get a look in at the Wallaby job? Because I think they changed coaches after the 2013 season. Checker came in 2014, or maybe I'm getting my time wrong. Did you ever get a serious look in?
Yeah, Craig, that was one of the reasons why I think people are a bit like what happened at the Brumbies. As I said, enjoying that year, got them to the final, beat the Lions. Got tapped on the shoulder by Australia to find out if I was keen to coach Australia. I said to them, I would be really keen, but I really didn't, again, want to be used as a guy to put the profile up. And they said, not at all. Spoke to my chairman, spoke to my board. And generally, I mean, basically all but gave me the job to come to Australia, and take the Australian job. And then I think in the last moment, there was a little bit of pressure, for whatever reason, maybe a foreigner again. They weren't too happy with Robbie Deans at that stage. That's why it was Robbie Deans that was actually getting moved across.
Mm.
And it's quite ironic because at the same time as South African was coaching the Australian cricket side, it was Mickey Arthur, and there was also unhappiness about that whole sort of South African, I suppose the way that he was handling the cricketers, and there was a lot of talk in the media about the way he gave them homework, etc., etc. And I think that generally what happened the last minute, Craig, whoever it was decided that they would leave me with the Brumbies and give Ewan McKenzie the job, which is fair. He played for Australia, and he did well with the Reds. They'd done really well there, and then I just felt, that if I'm not going to, it's miles away, and if I'm going to stay and coach Australian players, but I'm never going to be good enough to be considered to coach their national team when, in effect, I'm actually spending, most of my year coaching, 17 or 18 Wallabies that are playing for Australia anyway. Then I just thought that it probably, it wasn't, and it was only based on the fact that I was a foreigner. So, and it wasn't based on that they didn't think I was good enough or whatever. I just thought, well, it's probably easier if I move, And in hindsight, I probably made a mistake, Craig. Again, we all make decisions, and there's always consequences to those decisions, and there's reactions to those decisions. And if I look back, it's probably the one decision that I should have maybe stuck it out and just maybe, I suppose, just taken it on the chin. But at the time, it was very, I suppose again, I felt like I'd missed another opportunity, and I suppose immaturely flipping. Didn't give it much thought coming home to South Africa and then bumping into John Smith and listening to about what I could do at the Durban Sharks, made me probably seduced me a little bit there in terms of, the timing of where I was and the opportunity that I thought would come about.
Was taking the Sharks a good move, do you think? in hindsight?
No. I think because the one led to the other one, and I think again, then I made two mistakes because then obviously I left the Sharks as well for whatever reason. I mean, that doesn't matter. Had I stuck it out with the Brumbies, I think I probably would have avoided having to make the second decision, which I had to make. I mean, for me the second one was easier than the first one.
Yeah, and if you don't want to go into those details, we won't. But then Montpellier comes. French, I mean, that's a big sort of cultural change in, as you described earlier, the translation issue, the language issue. And also culturally, I suppose French rugby's run in a different way. You've got a billionaire owner who calls the shots. So in some ways, that's great. If you need money or you need anything and you've got his ear, then it can work. But I suppose conversely, if things aren't going well, a billionaire owner can start interfering in the team as well.
Yeah, but I must say, Mohamed Altrein's a fantastic man. I never got the feeling that. I mean, when I got there, they'd lost 9 games in a row. He was basically, desperate for them to stay up. And there's a lot of money at stake if you go down to the second division as opposed to playing in the first division. And he was obviously over the moon. The first game we played Toulon at home, and as I said, they just come off 9 consecutive defeats. So he was under the impression that if we had lost 1 or 2 more games, it was overs cadovers. We would have ended up getting relegated. So we beat Toulon. And you imagine that's Toulon with all the stars. You're talking about that World 15 side they had at that stage. We beat them. And then he called me to lunch the next day in a really nice restaurant in France. And he said, look, I really want you to stay. Because at that stage, I was only coming out to help him and basically sort of do like a consultancy job.
So were you not even the coach then? Was the previous coach still?
No, I was. But I wasn't there. I just basically was going to come until the end of the season and just see if I could get them to stay up.
Just briefly, what did you do in those week or so? What little things can you change to turn it around so quickly? Just so maybe the listener can understand what a coach does.
The way you talk, Craig, the way you sort of just try and instill a little bit of confidence. I think, also just create a bit of reality to them on the basis that whatever's happened in the past is irrelevant. They've got to try and really focus on what they can control going forward. So, and I just also made a couple of changes. Looked at a couple of the team. And I think what happens sometimes when you get a coach that comes in, he sees things a bit differently, tries a couple of different things. There's a bit more excitement. There's a bit more energy. Guys didn't think they were going to play, and then they do well, and that obviously has a domino effect and a spin-off on all the rest of the players. So, and then we ended up, as I said, then we went to play Oyonnax away, and Oyonnax were probably third last, and I thought, well, this is the easier job than I've ever had in my life. Just beat Toulon, and we're going to go play Oyonnax away, probably beat them by about 40 points and get a bonus point, and we ended up getting pumped, and then I worked out, but hang on, this is a completely different tournament. You don't win away from home. You can win your home games, and you don't just necessarily get on a bus and drive 6 hours and end up winning away. It doesn't matter where they are in the log. It's probably the way the culture is, the mindset of the players, that they don't believe they can win away. And I mean, it's just a historic thing. I think that it's not forgetting all days if referees would blow in a certain way and they were terrified, a little village against another village, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's just come over time, And so, another thing, Craig, what happens is, I don't think people know, but the sort of, you keep your best team at home. You keep them at home, and you sometimes know that you sometimes feel like you can't win away. You sort of you give the other players a bit of a game, So that's been coming up. Well, because I remember go down there and they end up, as I said, one of the things I'll never forget, you get a losing bonus point, and the people start singing in the change room and everything because you literally get 1 point out of the game. So I mean, it's an incredible experience that I had there. But you're right. I mean, the French way is different. The language was different. The whole culture was different. The motivation. You lose, you ask what happens. They say, we weren't ready. So, well, geez, we win. So what happened? Now we're ready. So I say, well, how do we work out on a Monday whether we're ready or not? So, but it's the French way. And when you experience it and you live it and you sense it, it's just another bow to a coaching CV, and obviously to part of your development as a coach.
And you brought in quite a few South Africans. Was that just to try and steel up that kind of mindset, change that mindset a bit?
I brought in a few. I mean, some of them were playing there already. I just sort of, a guy like Paul Willems, who's ended up playing for France, was at Grenoble. I just told him, listen, why don't you come, play at Montpellier? We can try and get a couple of other guys. We've got Jacques Duplessis to come across, and, later on, Bismarck and his brother Gianni came across. So, I mean, it's quite ironic. I think that the owner is, quite enjoys South African players. He's actually from Algeria or Syria, and from Syria, actually, and And being out of Africa, I suppose he understands that the South African, he obviously knows the Springboks and he knows the sort of dynamic. So since then, he's taken Pollard and he's taken Johan Goosen and he's taken Jan Serfontein. So yeah, even after I left, there's obviously been a massive influx of players who've gone into that team.
A guy like Yanni du Plessis, I mean, you bumped heads with him. There's no secret. He said it, but he told me once that, I bumped heads with Jake, but he's the best coach I've ever worked for. And was that the kind of thing, a guy like Yanni, you might bump heads with personally or off the field, but when, he respected you as a coach and you respected him as a player, is that a key to being a coach? You got to put personalities aside sometimes for the greater good of the team?
I'm surprised when you say we bumped heads. We never really bumped heads. I think that obviously what happens is you challenge each other, and people perceive that. And Yanni's a very bright guy. He's a doctor. So you can get bump heads or debate things that can take quite a while, and it can look like but I mean,
especially with Yanni, yeah.
Exactly. People that know Yanni would understand. I think his nickname's Google, I think, if everyone remembers it. But I mean, Yanni,
lovely guy.
I've had massive respect for Yanni. If you look what he's achieved, it's incredible. I mean, he's won lots and lots of trophies. Everywhere he's gone, he's a winner. And let's not forget that's what you want as a coach. You want guys who understand how to win.
Yeah.
As I said, he's won Curry Cups and World Cups and Tri Nations and all those other things. He's won Lion Series, etc., etc. I mean, he's definitely in his CV. I don't think people are aware of just how much he's achieved.
Yeah, he's got an amazing CV. Jake, the Bulls. Let's go. You've been appointed as director of rugby at the Bulls. Obviously, we're in lockdown. It's coronavirus. Do you have any idea when you might actually start that job?
Well, I've started. I mean, obviously, physically started, as in I'm actively every day trying to put together a squad, actively trying to recruit, talking to coaching staff, looking at some potential ways in which we can fast track our team, finding out where we've probably been short on certain things, in terms of our program, Craig. So again, whether we're going to look at certain things that we need to add to our program or readjust in our program. But I think physically, I'd just like to get up there. I think the problem that we have now with the lockdown is, we've got to wait until we can have more than X amount of people together in a gathering. So otherwise, it doesn't mean anything for me to get up there and stay in an office in Pretoria if I can't really get to work with the players. So, but we are, as I said, we are putting lots and lots of effort in. We're speaking like literally every day to the staff and every day to the people that I need to speak to about all the things we're getting into place.
And we've seen the sort of pay cut deal has been finalized between my players and the unions, and players are going to be taking pay cuts. And so they got 21 days to get out of their contracts, those that can and want to. I don't think too many players are going to find contracts elsewhere. But are you worried that you might see a couple of players who you would like to stay might exercise this option and get out?
Look, yeah, I'm thinking you always would be. What you don't want to do is lose one of your top players that you've obviously hedged your team around. I think it's like if we've got two Springbok props or two potential Springbok props in Lizo and in Trevor Yankani, who's played for South Africa and won a World Cup. What we do hate to know is that on the 13th he decides he's going to take another deal. I mean, obviously, you hope that it doesn't happen, but there's an opportunity that some club comes along and takes one of your players. But that's why it's so difficult, Craig, because you've got to sort of have plan B, plan C, just in case if you lose this guy. Let's not forget that because you can only have 45 players in your squad and because you've got a salary cap, if you lose 2 or 3 players, then that could literally change everything in your salary cap and change everything in the makeup of your 45-man squad.
And are you at all concerned that rugby will even have a competition structure next year if this whole year is wiped out? I mean, the amount of the potential sort of financial loss for the rugby industry is going to be massive. It's going to have massive ramifications, isn't it, in the future, regardless of when it starts this year, if at all.
Well, it is, but I mean, I think one thing that people can be proud of is that the players have bought into the fact that there's a generation behind them that wants to play rugby, and the sacrifices and the cutting, salary cuts they're taking now are the ones that are the things that are going to save rugby going forward. I'm quite positive there, Craig. I think that between now and the end of the year, there'll be some sort of rugby. I mean, I don't know if it'll be as full as the calendar should be, but I've got no doubt that between now and December that there's going to be at least 2 months of some sort of rugby. So that's why we're planning as if, there's probably 2 months of Curry Cup. If it's that, then at least we want to be prepared to be competitive in that last 2-month window.
What's your mandate with the Bulls? I mean, you contracted till 2023. What have you sort of? I know no one can guarantee results, but have you sort of said to the board, this is the sort of the progress we want to make in year 1, 2, and 3, and so on?
No. Part of my discussion with them, we just want to win. And as soon as you start saying we'll win in 2 years or 3 years, the reality is you want to win as quickly as you can, and I think we need to find a way in which we can get to winning. And I think that what's nice about where I am, the mandate's quite simple in that we all want to win. We want a winning team. We know how important winning is. We know what it does to the people of, Pretoria, and what it does to the stadium at Loftus when we full. So, we want to turn it around as quickly as we can, and I'm just very fortunate that when I have meetings with my board and I meet the role players, they think exactly the same. And in fact, they say that same thing every time we get together in a Zoom conference is, listen, boys, what do we need to do and what are we going to do to make sure we win?
Yeah, and it's going to be a big challenge, but I suppose I know this, don't take this negatively, but you've made a habit of picking up teams at lowish points, the Brumbies, the Springboks, the Bulls are now at a lowish point, and turning them around, and Montpellier, another one. Is that something that you specifically specialize in, or it's just happened?
No. I just think it's worked out like that. I would love to have gone and, taken over a team that are world champions, or taken over a team that are Super Rugby champions, or taken over. I'd love that. I would love to see. I think it must be, I'm not saying it's easy, but I'd love to have got into an environment where things are going and you can, but it's just so happened that every time I've joined a team, they've probably had their backs against the wall and they've been down on the ropes. And I suppose, because I've had the experience of doing that, I'm confident that I can change it. But it's not purposefully done. I think that I would love to.
Yeah.
I look at teams and I think I wonder what it'd be like to actually go into that environment and coach that kind of player or that kind of person or team in that environment.
And lastly, Jake, I think when you were Bok coach 13, 14 years ago, if someone had said to you, you're going to be sort of director of rugby at the Bulls, you probably would have laughed at them.
Yeah, you're right. I would never, ever have thought that I would be going to live in Pretoria. But I'll say this, Craig. One thing I have seen, and that is probably the thing that I used to, I suppose, noticed even more when I was the Bok coach. They are incredibly passionate about their team. They're incredibly loyal about their team. So much so they'll challenge the Springbok coach as they did when I was there. And I said to someone the other day in Linwood Road, I think Willem Strauss told me, and Willem Strauss was the president of the union. I think in Linwood Road, there's 47 rugby fields. You can't.
Yeah.
You understand how rugby crazy that whole sort of union or that region is. And even though you say I would never have thought about it, I can tell you I'm really, really excited, and it's it's almost like another boost boost for me getting into that sort of environment.
Jake White, been an absolute pleasure having you on today. Thanks so much for your time, and good luck with the Bulls. I know it's not going to be easy in these coming months, but I hope everyone can get back on the field soon. Thanks for joining us.
No, thank you, guys. Thank you. Thanks so much, Craig.
This podcast is made possible by our Maverick Insiders. Please consider becoming part of our Maverick Insider community, where for a nominal fee every month, you are supporting quality independent journalism. You also get some cool benefits such as Uber vouchers when the coronavirus pandemic subsides, and engagement with our journalists thrown in. Please go to dailymaverick.co.za/insider to sign up and become part of the Maverick Insider community. Also remember to sign up to our Maverick Sports newsletter, which hits your inbox on a Monday, and never miss another podcast by signing up via your favorite platform. I'm Craig Ray. Thanks so much for joining us this week.